Burnout 3 Takedown, the third installment in the Burnout series, was released in September 2004 to near perfect reviews. It received critical acclaim from the video game press, becoming one of the highest rated racing video games of all time. It was developed by Criterion Games and published by Electronic Arts. Prior to the release of Takedown, Criterion Games was collaborating with EA on a remake of the 1988 game, Skate or Die. But with disagreements, the game was cancelled and the two companies had a falling out. Later, EA Games wanted to partner back up with Criterion to make Burnout 3 Takedown. Criterion Games said yes, but with one condition: that Electronic Arts would not interfere in the creative process. During the creation of Burnout 3 Takedown, Alex Ward, the creative director for Criterion Games, stated that EA's snowboarding game series SSX was an influence for Burnout 3's bolder and brasher nature. The company wanted to make the game a lot more aggressive than the other two installments. Ward wanted to make gamers feel like they were fighting through traffic and not racing through it. That is what led to the creation of Takedowns, a feature that rewarded the player with boost and points for knocking their opponents off the tracks. This mechanic became the focal point for Burnout 3's core design. There's also a new boost system implemented into Burnout 3, so burnouts and burnout chains have been removed, and in their place, you're able to boost at any time as long as you have a boost bar, which you can increase to 4 times by doing takedowns, drifting,
that's gotta hurt!
And near misses, to name a few. They also added way more vehicles when comparing it to its predecessors. A grand total of 67 vehicles can be unlocked and crashed. On Burnout 3, they also included online play on both the Xbox and PlayStation 2. 5 different game modes can be played online on the game. 2 of them are racing modes and the other 3 are different forms of crash events. In April 2010, the online services were shut down, but there are unofficial ways to still game online. There's also local split-screen multiplayer that offers some intense competition. The team improved the graphics engine, renderware, to give between 50 to 100% faster rendering than Burnout 2. This big boost allowed them to add features like real-time radiosity lighting and better environment mapping effects on the vehicles. The team also decided early on that the game would have to run at 60 FPS in order to fully feel the speed of the game properly. The fact that they got this game to look this great and run at 60 frames on a PS2 is just pure magic. On both the Xbox and PlayStation 2, it runs at 30 frames during the crash sequences because they wanted to dramatically increase the number of particles and debris that were rendered. Lastly, on the PS2, the game menus only run at 30 frames, whereas on the Xbox they run at 60. I'm not too sure why, but that's just how it is. Both the PlayStation 2 and Xbox feature over 40 licensed songs presented on the car's radio station. The Xbox version allows for a custom soundtrack due to the built-in hard drive. Let's take a minute and talk about Burnout Legends. This game was released on the PSP and Nintendo DS in 2005. The PSP port was developed by Criterion Games, while the DS one was developed by Visual Impact. The reason I bring these up is because it came out around the same time and offers very similar gameplay mechanics to Burnout 3 Takedown. This is essentially more of a best of Burnout game as it features tracks from all 3 console games while maintaining the new mechanics of Part 3. What's really crazy is that there's 95 cars to unlock that's from Burnout 2 and 3. When comparing the two handhelds, the PSP looks miles better, but that's a given since the DS is basically a lower end Nintendo 64, where the PSP is a lower end PlayStation 2. I just wanted to talk about these real quick for this video, but I'm no longer going to be mentioning them as they're not really the same game as Burnout 3 Takedown. Let's move on to comparing the PS2 and Xbox now. Let's slow this down a bit. Take a look at the street reflection on the Xbox's truck. It looks awesome. Whereas on the PS2 you only get a very small amount. That's not to say it doesn't look great, because it does. Just not as good in the reflection territory. Going back, the building on the PlayStation 2 has slightly more detail to it. Over on this side, we can see more of the fence. Overall, there's more aliasing on the PS2, but it's not that noticeable. Looking at the PlayStation 2, it looks sharper overall because it has no intense anti-aliasing, but that's because the Xbox's textures suffer some blurring from the anti-aliasing, but slightly less jaggies. You can see better sharpness on the mountains and buildings. The color and contrast does seem to be better on the Xbox. Everything seems to be more bolder, which is something I personally prefer. Also, the draw distance seems to be equal on both consoles. You can see the same stuff back there. Again, because the anti-aliasing present on the Xbox, it's not as crisp, which is showing in the Tiger Woods advertisement billboard. You can see it a lot more clear on the PS2. Moving on to the forest section, the Xbox is showcasing some nice tree textures. Overall, the trees do look better, but of course, you wouldn't really be able to notice this in-game as you're going really fast. What's interesting to me though is that the Xbox seems to show more jaggedness in the forest. The aliasing is almost not present on the PS2 on this scene, but you do get some sweet car reflection over here though, which is always nice. Both the consoles are captured with the same hardware and software. With that being said, I found it interesting that the tunnel lights are yellow on the Xbox and more orange on the PS2. Going back a tad, the slow down sign on both are orange, so it's not a color issue. On this shot, I wanted to show how much more jagged the bridge was over here. Let's take a look at the loading times. The Xbox starts the race at just over 8 seconds. And the PlayStation 2 takes a bit longer at just over 14 seconds. Here's a loading chart that IGN conducted in 2009 for the game. What's real crazy is the boot up time. 45 seconds for the PS2 versus 22 seconds on the Xbox. Yikes. I mean, let's be real here, both versions are near identical. I personally think they made the game on the PlayStation 2, then ported it over to the Xbox and amped it up a bit. For me, the graphics are too close to even care. The sound is basically the same unless you have a nice audio setup, then the Xbox would be for you because it puts out some better sound. As for controls, I prefer them on the Xbox because I found it easier to use gas with the right trigger, boost with A, and e-brake with X. Whereas on the PS2, you use gas with X, boost with R1, and e-brake with square. I just found it more difficult to move my thumb from X to square in a hurry. It felt more natural, keeping my finger always on the right trigger for the gas and my thumb on e-brake. All that nitpicking aside, I'm equally happy with either version. Criterion Games knows how to push the PlayStation 2 hardware to its limits. With that being said, I'm Jurassic Ninja, and you just watched my side-by-side for Burnout 3 Takedown. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, like, and ring that bell. Thanks for being an awesome fan, and until next time, take it easy.